Look at this graph.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing a more of a meta-analysis type of video, and we're going to be doing it in the form of a tier list. This was requested from someone on my Discord, and I remember that person that requested a Speedy's a Hawk video. That video is coming. It's in my backlog. Anyway, before we get into it, like, subscribe. I have a Discord. Come join. You can make requests and stuff. You can call me a cringe cleaver, like a bunch of my friends do. And yeah, let's get into it. So in the fair and balanced tier, like, you'll notice that these tier names are like very fun, quote unquote, like fun. I'm just having a little bit of fun with talking about a lot of unfun topics, just like guiding light openers and book. But yeah, the first three units are not first pick material, but generally the units you see in the top row are units that you will see either pre-banned or first picked a lot. So I'm gonna dedicate a special moment for the first three in this category, which is Bellion, AOL, and Zeo, just because they, in one way or another, shut down a whole mechanic or whatever. Like, I guess AOL doesn't, but AOL just does so much, she might as well. Bellion shuts down souls, and she has good reach for Stenny, one of the best book carriers. And so a lot of playstyles currently are really reliant on books because they're so strong and flexible. So it makes sense that Bellion is a popular pre-ban unit. She's also, like, depending on her build, she can be a toxic counter unit as well, that like two shots aggressive teams with a Elbrus proc or even a counter proc. And Zeo is up there because he shuts down a lot of these like aggressive speed plays that rely on like Conquer Elias, Ran, or any opener that really isn't, guiding light or stealth, which isn't that common unless you're a ranger. And he's also very flexible in the way that he can be built with damage, he can hold book, he can be built with incredibly high effectiveness for like Yafine or whatever. And AOL's there because AOL is also like a very flexible unit that's very oppressive. She punishes a lot of things incredibly hard. She punishes faster units if they AoE by like pushing up and giving skill null. She punishes slower units by CCing them with incredibly strong debuffs like silence and unbuffable are some of the strongest debuffs that aren't like defense break or whatever. And yeah, the next two are probably two units people are really sick of seeing. Lua is our first guiding light opener on this tier list, and she is the most notorious. She is often pre-banned because she's incredibly obnoxious to deal with. She has that extra turn mechanic. She honestly doesn't need that good gear because all she needs is like speed and guiding light, and you can make it work. Her base kit is just incredibly oppressive because not being able to press your buttons while the opponent is just gives you a bunch of free momentum on top of speed buff, so she can cycle faster and continually do this to you. And her S1 has like game-winning defense breaks if they stick. And Conquer Elias is kind of in a similar vein. She kind of hammers down any mid-speed opener that is slower than her, so this is one of the reasons why like top model and closer aren't like super popular in the current format, just because she kind of hammers down any aggression she outspeeds with the attack down and vigor. But she also sets up her own aggression by stripping off important buffs such as like immunity, escort buff of SCROL, and she provides like a pseudo attack buff with vigor and her imprint. And she consistently provides value by pulling someone in for the dual attack. And if it's a DPS or like a support whose S1 is like really impactful, such as like DJB healing up like your entire team from chip damage, like even then. And one other thing about both Lua and Conquer Elias is that they're both like very flexible. You can use them aggressively, you can use them like defensively too, because if someone like races you with like Lua or Conquer Elias, you can just like tank down, and if they have like very poor bridge units, like they can still cut and shut down your opponent's cleave. So it's just like very obnoxious units to deal with. And then next on the list, we have our second guiding light opener, like 2 out of 3 of the trio. And it's Faithless Litica. She was kind of the it girl of the season against Standard. After her buff, which made it so that she is kind of disconnected from the CR push with her S2, it made her a lot better since it means that she could choose when she wanted to AoE and when she didn't want to AoE. And her being able to like full reset on like hand guide like really shuts them down, or like key units. And she has that like really coveted ignore ER soul burn, so you can even do it on Destinas if you wanted to, or like DJBs. But yeah, like she was very cash unit. Like her viability skyrocketed the better gear you gave her, and she had flexible builds too. So she could have been built like the regular high speed, high-ish effectiveness Faithless Litica, or you can build her a DPS Faithless Litica to actually like be able to do like decent damage to Steny and kill them off maybe. And then next we have our last like quote unquote opener in this tier. I guess like DJB is like kind of flexible too. He can be run on a variety of builds, slower with more bulk and more ER, faster with, you know, more speed. And he runs on a variety of artifacts that are all annoying in their each way. Like Eternatus was a really big one because it lets him cut after certain openers like Conquerilius, Ran. And he could also run like Bastion just to make sure like you don't get debuffed, but he's also one of those units that is very flexible in the way that you can use him anti-cleave, but you can also use him like aggressively because he has barrier inversion. And just because the nature of a lot of popular support units, like barrier inversion is just very strong because it's a lot of free damage on top of giving you an extra turn. And he has like a lot of like bonus utility in his kit, like his S1 being an AoE heal, like can actually come in clutch a lot of times. His S1 stuns, so he has like solo potential if you get lucky enough. But yeah, overall, very solid unit. A unit that I used a lot. And I think one of the major benefits about DJB is that when you see him, it doesn't immediately say aggressive. Like if someone first picks like Rand Politis, you can basically like go into anti-cleave, but if they pick DJB, it's still very like a neutral pick. Like, and I think that was a lot of where his strength came from in the drafting phase, because this season was marked by a lot of pivots. So by having your draft be as flexible as possible in the 1, 2, and 3 position, that made it so that the rest of your draft became a lot more about hard targeting what your opponent was doing instead of like being set in one box. And we have the 2 DPSs in the S tier, which is Steny and Aiden. So Steny was basically what I would say is like the most reliable and safe DPS. In this meta, I think DPSs either need a defensive passive or some sort of like stealth to survive because of all the fast speed options that just like hammer them down, like Aseds or like even Fast Hawks, like top model Luluka. And Steny kind of does a lot of things. She's a book holder, so she's flexible. She ramps up so she can like solo carry games. And she has respectable damage in her like first 2 turns, especially if you build her with penetration set. And she has a lot of mitigation, and not mitigation from like stealth. And since this meta is a lot more single target focused than it was before due to all the units that punish you for having AoEs, she was one of like the very good DPS units, and a lot of bruiser or tanky players actually did opt to pre-ban her. And the final unit is Savior Aiden. She's kind of an unpopular unit currently in the fan base just because of her RNG nature. Like there's a lot of games where you lose where Aiden just gets hit or like 30%, or you hit them and they just lose because Aiden dies. But other than that, Aiden's a great unit. Like she's very flexible. She can be used in cleave to anchor it. She can be used against cleave to one-shot them with Moonlight Dreamblade. Her builds are flexible and all over the place. She has solo carry potential. She has a lot of utility. And she's kind of like the best things of APOC and Rylet combined, except evasion. So what I mean is like, even if you ignore her, she does too much for you to actually like ignore her till the end, like APOC. But if you don't ignore her and try to focus her, if you don't actually hit her, it's like Rylet where she will counter you occasionally, and it's like APOC where she pushes herself up and she gets some additional benefit from you focusing her. So she's kind of a unit that has it all. But yeah, like very meta defining. Even with all the evasion counters out, since her evasion is innate, like half of them don't work against her, like Melissa. So it was just like a very, very toxic and widespread unit. But we're moving on to the A tier, where we're going to see a lot of the popular meta units. I'm gonna preemptively put A mid here because she's like on her artifact thing, on her own signature artifact, she gives like a 40% CR boost. That's like crazy with skill no. And I think that's gonna be very crazy. Like people are theory crafting with like Kisei and Ludwig or whatever, but I'm thinking that even without them, even like regular DPSs like Steny, like they'll pop off with the CR push and attack buff. So like do not underestimate A mid, I think. But yeah, moving on to Edward. He kind of really popped off this season just because there were so many like debuffers running around. And even if they didn't draft a lot of debuffers, if you built Ed on lifesteal, he still had the ability to like solo like Dark Corvus Apox out just by virtue of counterattacking so often, since a lot of units have debuffs on their S1s and they can't actually avoid proccing it. Like the Steny matchup, for example, on paper should be Steny favored, but you'll find in practice it's a lot more like 50-50 just because it's down to how much Steny actually decides to proc her poison, which is way more than the Abyss floors you actually need her to proc poisons on. But yeah, very solid. Ramping damage, flexible build, anti-debuff. What more could you want? And then the next 3 units are like kind of like the standard package right now. I like Hand Guy a little bit less just because he's so, you know, low tempo in the sense that he kind of gives up the speed race, but like the other 2 do too. But yeah, they're basically standard staples. Hand Guy is immune to any debuffs that are shorter than 2, that aren't like a 2-turn stun or whatever. And he provides a lot of value. Shield, strip, CR push, like still as good as he was before. Destina's here. She fell off a little bit just because Bryce area exists and the cucking of her revive hampers a lot of her potential. But if you build a tanky enough team around her so that the Bryceria player can't actually kill any units, her S3 still heals as much as it used to before, so it's still good. And SC Airwell, still the best mitigation unit because Escort is just that good, you know. Not very surprising. CR push, self-sustain, shield, light units get added synergy, we love. Easy inclusion into the A tier. Then we have Ran and Politis, just because, you know, Ran is just one of the best openers in the game. He's kind of like an opener that has a damage to kill other openers, like Ased, except it's AoE this time, so do with that what you will. And he can hold RNL for some like bullshit plays where you just S3s and S1's a key unit and you just lose. Or he can activate Commander Pavel that way. Like I've lost games where they have no good activator for C Pavel but ran RNLs and I just died to them anyway. And Politis, just because she has that unique mechanic of shutting down non-attack skills but like actually well. Sorry Celine. Degen builds and damage builds are both good because the damage one holds book and the Degen one holds crown or violin, and both are very obnoxious and very good picks depending on the situation. And the next pick here is Landy, and this is a speed Landy. I think there's still a place for like tanky Landys, but not in aggressive drafts. In aggressive drafts, I think the way you want to go is a max guiding light on high speed Landy with high damage, which is not like the hardest. It's not the easiest either, but it provides you with a lot of tempo and it just lets you nuke down these like Steny teams or whatever. And the added cycling you get from the speed buff Landia gives on her S3 just makes her very, very oppressive when you face it. Next in line is Sylvan Sage Vivian, an anchor unit that also holds book and provides crit damage buff and some sustain. And one of her synergies as an anchor is that all these units that a lot of people like to pick into cleave or aggro, such as like APOC or Designer a little bit, or even like Lionheart Zermia, don't really do that well into her. So very good unit. And she's hot. Sage Ball, shuts down speed, extra turns, clap, has the potential to kill evasion units too, can stun lock, CC lock, very obnoxious, 10 out of 10. Or like negative 10 out of 10. Karina's here just because she is, like an anti-single target cleave type of pick. She's kind of weaker to these debuffing openers such as Peyra or Celilius, but she provides good damage and defense breaks, and she can snipe off key units with that CR push, so very good. A Tywin, I think, is going to be busted. He cleanses off debuffs, and a lot of openers these days aren't like super debuff heavy, like Conquer Lilius, and hitting A Tywin isn't too hard, But ER, ignore, death break, and stun sounds pretty good to me, And he has that unique mechanic of like soul steal on this one. Fapton's here. Fapton is pretty obnoxious. That high effectiveness and being able to stun lock Destinas, just a real terrorist unit in standard. Shu is here just because Shu can high roll so much, and she's good against a lot of these. Well, I wouldn't say that she's good, but she introduces a lot of variance against aggro or cleave setups, and since aggro and cleave setups are already so like RNG heavy, like if you brick a crucial 15% on like a Celilius S2 or whatever, like that's like all game losing. And so if they pick Shu, they're adding another element of that into your games, which is not very fun. And she's like quite reliable in hitting the S1, S2 when you're against her. So I'm gonna put her up here. Yolha and FCC are the two most popular two most popular mitigation picks. Yolha is like the anti-anchor / anti-evasion tank, where she's like very threatening, especially if you hide DPSs that are stealth like Landy or Stenny behind her, and they're kind of forced hitter because she can literally kill a unit 100 to 0, and she cleanses and pushes. And we all know why SCC is good. She provides a ton of mitigation through her barriers. She can be built bruiser too, so she's very flexible. And even though there's a few sources of barrier inversion, she's still as good as ever. Then we have Solitaria, another terrorist standard unit. She can just CC your team down forever if she's lucky enough, or depending on the artifact. She's a Frenzy 10 unit because she drags out games with stuns. She shuts down a bunch of units, SSB, Rylet, Arya, any unit with focus. Moving on, Bryceria, one of the new additions to the high RTA format, but her ignore ER Soulburn, very good. Her ability to be sticky on the battlefield due to guiding light and prevent revives from key units like Destina or Ruel, very, very good. Decent damage too, and she can't miss on evasion units if you are holding like Misha or Symbol, but if they're using if you're using guiding light, it's only 20%, which honestly isn't too bad. And Cowrick's here just because Cowrick is one of those rare skill reset units that also holds book, can also kill Stenny or other openers thanks to the Mage Frenzy buff and the attack buff from S3. So like very good unit if you had the gear to gear him, which I did not. Millam's here because Millam's also one of those safe quote-unquote book picks, except she's a little bit more vulnerable than like Sylvan Sage, Vivian, and Stenny, but she is also a decent counter to evasion units. She's also a good like ramping finisher like she doesn't ramp, but she has like finishing abilities. Like her S2 fully stacked with a lot of damage. She has the ability to like continuously be threatening and sticky thanks to her evasion after she gets her first turn. Things like that. And APOC's here just because APOC is still as good as ever. There's a few more answers to her, yes, but her ability to be incredibly tanky while doing incredible amounts of damage cannot be understated. And the utility of her S3 also cannot be understated, so she makes the list here. And so in the B tier, we're going to see a few more common-ish units that are a bit more niche. So I'm going to group Leica and Peyra here just because they're good openers in their own rights, because they have like a few niches. Like Leica has that like dual attack niche with target that's very nice. Peyra has that nice niche where she can S2, S1 with crit chance neck and proxy Pavel. She can actually like cuck like Sage Ball and stuff with high enough effectiveness. But I put them in the B tier just because they have a lot of answers to her. So Leica has fallen out of favor in the meta recently just because everyone's been running a lot of immunity. So like immunity Politis, immunity like super damage Rimuru or degen Rimuru, or like even Aiden and Lionheart Zermia. There's like a lot of answers to Aiden is what I mean. And the same for Peyra. Like a lot of these anti-debuff units like design her a little bit or designed for like Peyra, so they shut her down. But Peyra also deals incredibly poorly with DJB, and she doesn't actually win speed races by herself. So like a situation that often happens with Peyra is that you go and then the opponent just kills you anyway because they picked Sid and Green Vildred. But they're still like very good when you pick them in the right situations. Zahawk's here because he was a great unit to set up on slower players with the S2 attack buff EE, and he had the ability to hit any evasion unit and be kind of sticky with that invincibility, which was nice. But you know, again, he's like hampered. Like he doesn't win against Lua, he doesn't win against Conquer Elias. If he gets outsped by like any of these units, he doesn't win. He doesn't have a winning matchup into like Stanny either. I don't think he has the damage to kill DJB at like top speeds. So that's what kind of holds him back from the previous tiers. And then we have Araz, just because Araz was a still a very solid mitigation unit. It's just he didn't see as much play even at higher speeds, because like if you wanted the dual attack, you could just pick Leica, or like they were often picked together. But if you just wanted mitigation, the other options were better. And if you wanted like some offensive pressure, like I think Yolha did that a bit better. But yeah, not a bad unit still. Lionheart is here just because of the prominence of Conquer Elias, and so what a lot of tank down players chose to do is just pick Lionheart against Conquer Elias, hope they can survive the burst, and then one-shot the Conquer Elias team back with a Lionheart S3. Excuse me. Which was very obnoxious. But yeah, that's it for Lionheart Zermia. Very solid DPS due to all the counter mechanics currently present, like Aiden and Politis and Conquer Elias and whatever. Ida's here just because there's a lot of units that kind of pressure Ida L from being picked early, like for example like AOL if you didn't pre-ban her, these counter AoE units which I can't think of right now for some reason, but she was a great 4-5 pick just because of her tempo swing from the CR manipulation into the stun, can be a C-Power activator, is a book holder, very based. T-Crozet and Eden were some of the premier anti-aggression tanks, T-Crozet providing the most single target mitigation and push up with defense buff and anti-crit, and Eden just because he absorbs so much damage with protection set and his built-in escort. It was kind of disgusting. So the next three are kind of getting grouped together. So these are like light ER comps. So Armin and Maid were often picked together and then giving the team ER imprint to each other. So if you include Shamadras from Maid, that's like 60-ish ER you're just giving to free to your DPS units. That lets them resist like Ida stuns or like low effectiveness debuffs, and that made them very popular. and they're just like a very solid tank down draft. Ruel is just good into this single target meta if they don't have good ways to pressure her out, but again, she suffered against Bryceria. Ningning's here because she's really good into a lot of these standard units. Like, she's kind of anti-poultice, but she's also anti-barrier, and she has the potential to continuously cycle her skills and be really obnoxious and give a DPS a lot of turns. But her shortcoming was that her speed wasn't the fastest, so she again gets hammered down by like Lua, Conquerlius, higher end Fliticas and stuff. And that kind of held her back from higher ranks. Dark Corvus was like the ender of standard, low damage standard teams. So a lot of these like anti-cleave standard teams kind of have low damage. Like a designer a little bit cannot solo a Dark Corvus. So if you pick him like 5 as an anchor in aggressive comps against certain teams, he'll be really good. And especially now that he can't get stunned, he's even better because he has better ability to cycle with like Durandal or whatever and just like one-shot your team. Reamer's here just because, you know, immunity is making a resurgence. Units like Leica are back, and he's just very good. Like a build that's being really popular right now is one with like Symbol of Unity, and it's designed to be able to like one-shot Fliticas or like one-shot speed landies through the S2, and it's very annoying. DDR post buff, ability to shut down teams, slower tankier teams with like Venom, because they do so much damage and injury, and he's very annoying providing sleep. He's kind of like Solitaria if Solitaria was a Soul Weaver. But yeah, a very solid unit. A unit that I slept on throughout the season, undeservedly, but tragic. Designer a little bit. Anti-debuff unit that can also function as a solo DPS if you have the gear score kingdom to support it, and you're not against like APOC or like Dark Corvus. But yeah, very solid. Ased is one of the high base speed units, but he also steals souls, so I think he's like a step above the other units on this tier list, like A. coli or Top Monoluluka, just because of his base speed and such. Kisei is like the other counterpart to Kaorik, except where she has less utility than Kaorik, I would say, but she has more like overall raw damage, and she's a little bit less self-sufficient because she doesn't hold her own book or whatever. But her S1 with like Windrider especially did 1 billion damage. And our S2 could regularly kill Spectre Tenebrius, especially if you had no mitigation. Winter here is a really good unit just because she was able to be built at like 300, not like 300, but like 280, 290 speeds with like 200 plus effectiveness. Very annoying. And the last unit in B is Rylet, just because a lot of teams aren't built to deal with evasion especially, and if you pick Rylet against them, he has a solid chance to solo them. Like, he deals pretty well into these like low tempo units like Hand Guy, Destina, SC Arwell. Granted, they don't hit you, but yeah, that is the life of a Rylet player, I guess. But moving on to like the more situational picks, like basically the higher you are on the tier list, the earlier you could reliably pick them out. But yeah, so rounding up with C, we have Archdemon Shadow. I feel like Archdemon Shadow lost a lot of value in aggressive matchups because although you could rely on her as like a toxic counter unit to blind people, that's kind of unreliable, and she doesn't provide enough against aggro. But against a lot of these anchors, she actually did really well. So she does have a spot in the metagame. I just don't think people are going to pick her very early anymore, especially since like Hand Guy Aras isn't like the go-to standard combo. Senya's here just because of the prominence of all these like unbuffables, like Bryce area for one, like Hand Guy, CC, ML Bologna. But I feel like she's lost a lot of value over this past season, and although the main build switched from effectiveness to ER, she still has trouble finding her place. The next is Crow. He's kind of like a slower tempo Yulha because he doesn't push, but he does provide a nice defense buff. But in all honesty, aggressive teams don't really need it. So they provide like the more immediate threat Yulha can provide with the 100% redirect to provoke and such. Emilia is just like a CR push unit, but her base speed is kind of low. And again, aggressive team comps, like they don't really care about like cleansing debuffs off or whatever. And I don't think she does enough against aggressive comps either, just because she's most likely going to be outsped by most people's openers, and her gear is probably better elsewhere. Her gear is probably better off elsewhere. Arya, very good anchor unit, very good like tank down unit, just because if she can survive the initial onslaught, she can solo carry a game with the counters. But she has a lot of like solid counters like Bryce area, Landy, and such. Strays, C. Pavel, and Roy, these are all like setup cleaners for standard players. Well, against standard players, because they don't have good options to shout them out. But they all do some things differently. Strays deletes the highest HP unit. He requires the least support, but he also provides the least amount of game-ending impact. Roy holds his own book, and he decreases evasion, but he kind of needs another support unit that provides book or like provides a dual attack. So that's his caveat. C. Pavel just needs a lot of crits, which a lot of fast openers cannot do. So that's another thing. Pavel is just against like these like Celine comps or squishy unprotected DPS comps, and they weren't too common. And he also won a book, so he kind of has like the lead. He needs like the most support out of these like fast DPS types, which is why he's down here so low. And Obseg and Aelina are there just because they are force bans against the things they are designed to go against, such as counter units and barriers, but kind of mid against everything else. Emma Bolan is here just because I think she's quite situational. She doesn't have a defensive passive, so that limits her ability to be picked into aggressive comps unless you have like a ton of mitigation, which isn't like, in that case, why wouldn't you pick something else like SSB or like something else that's better at closing out the game? Alot, Skyther are the situational cleave picks thanks to the Mage Frenzy, and the Mage Frenzy is still here, but we'll have to see if people will do it next season without the 7 Mage Frenzy. Melissa's here because of the ignore ER soul burn, but she's still kind of a niche unit. Her curse and S2 just are anti-synergistic. Doesn't work too well. Cesaria's here just because she's more niche thanks to all the anti-debuff answers. And while the popular build for Cesaria is like a 200 plus effectiveness one, she's still very unreliable due to all the 15% that can fuck her over, and she loses against Edward, blah 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 blah. You already know. Emo Celine, she's kind of like a niche unit, but she's like actually like surprisingly good into comps that cannot kill her, and she provides like a decent answer against like Kayron, BBK, anti-cleave options. Bunny Dom is here as like a discount Celia's passive, but honestly, you can counter that with like Poultice or Ida, so like I don't love it, but it's doable, and I've seen people do it against me, so. Alencia is here because she's a very poor answer into aggro, but she can make it work if the team is like tanked down enough, and she's also like not bad into tank down comps thanks to her entry. A. coli, the worst speed contest damage opener, but you know, the highest damage one if you have book, and team-wide silence. TML, fast, better closer Charles, that's hotter. And yeah, but like she's hammered down by like all these fast units that people like to run, and she doesn't do like enough into tank downs. Like that's why you don't see people pick her too often. BBK Kayron are your like degen counter cleave units, but thanks to things like A. Elena and BBK, they don't see the most play, but they can definitely still be picked if the opponent drafts for it. LQC, pretty bad into aggressive drafts, but can be done with tank down teams with like Maid and Carmen, doable. Phyllis is just there as like a last ditch mitigation against extra attacks, but it's pretty situational, I would say. And then in the lower tiers, I'll just go like rapid fire into these like niche units. So the first 3 units here, Hyafin, G-Perg, and Bad Cat Armin, they were picked into stealth comps. Like if you had like 3 guiding light units and like Steny or like other stealth units, and they had Zio, you would pick them to force a positive outcome. But other than that, they weren't really picked too much. Armin lost a lot of value, I think, due to all the debuffing units, and especially Bryce area. So I didn't see her too much, unless I like picked Ida too early. Roana's good into these like counter units, but like aggressive teams aren't really running counter units. Like you can use her for C Pavel, but C Pavel's still gonna delete something with his S3. So wouldn't recommend. Rem Violet still left solo potential if picked into the right team, like Rem against like debuffing Cleave or Violet against a bunch of water units. Elena's good against AoE attacks like Flutica or Peyra if you're confident in your ER, but most people would rather pick something else. Yafine is down here just because she needs Zio, and once Zio is banned, Yafine's a lot like riskier to play, and she suffers the same syndrome of like she's not good into Aiden, she's not good into AoL. Mercedes, decent unit into like Landy, Steny if you were really desperate for an answer, same with Carrot. Axe God is here just because Axe God's like a decent unit against Light, but honestly, if you're looking for a counter LQC type of thing, I don't think it's it. SSB is here just because against certain type of cleave setups, she's really good thanks to her S2 counterattacks. Flan and Haste are definitely usable, death-breaking openers, but still pretty niche thing due to their speed tier. RB is mostly used as a counter cleave nowadays. Like nobody uses a cleave RB, but he has the ability to counter cleave 18 through the degen auto attacks or like an S3 from a Gab full damage RB. Wanda counters, like kind of blanket counters all these evasion units, but you could honestly pick something else like Zahawk or Bryceria, but if you're really desperate, she was there. Jenna, she holds book, she prevents mitigation, so she was nice, but she's kind of slow, and again, most people would gear something else. Charlotte's like a desperate Steny Landy answer, didn't really love it, kind of bad into Ida and Bryceria and all that. Ludwig is a niche unit that can support ignore ER, so there's that. And he does a lot of AoE damage, but you know, again, like, outside from Amid, I think he's more unreliable as a pick. Ravi's here just because she can solo against like low damage teams, but like worse because she can actually get stunned. C-Dom's here because some cleavers like to use her, like with like Flitica or whatever, and she holds book, a lot of single target damage. Teiyu, anti non-attack skill, but like way worse than Paltus and T-Surin because she's good against like certain cleave comps, especially if you're on a speeder build, but he's not very good into like Ida or the like, so like kind of sussy. And so these pocket picks are units that people don't pick really often, but when they're picked, they can be like very impactful. So Alpha really punishes slower players than her that aren't on immunity. F10A punishes like AOL teams because AOL cannot purge off the unbuffable and the redirect to provoke, and she can like have game-winning defense breaks on her S2 counter, and she can provoke people with her S1 now. A Momo is here because of the weird people that build her at like 300 ER or like 350 ER and can cleanse their team, so she actually provides a lot of value when picked correctly. ML Ken, very good into certain comps like Ran Ida cleaves that don't have ignore ER C Soulburn. Cowrick is a decent anti-standard pick against like Senya and Bellion and can one-shot random units or through a counter like an AoE counterattack or through C Lilius. Judge Kize is very good if you know you're going to be outspeeding them and she can safely take a turn. Blue Dom, very niche, but you can use her in counter cleave because of units like Flutica and Ida that like are likely to proc her S2. So their follow-up options such as Roy or C Pavel are likely to kill themselves. So that's fun. Dizzy because nobody expects a 300C Dizzy, and she debuffs Aiden and cripples her through a miss, and that's pretty unique. So there's that, and yeah, there's this Fire Aura guy that's running around with like a 300 speed fire Araminta, very spooky, very high damage, not expected. And then in the copium hopium tier, these are units that people like to use, like to say that they're good, but I didn't really personally see too much throughout the season. And like Bihu, like copium, Hua, like under-leveled helmets just so a unit can work is kind of cope. Dian is just too slow for the fast openers, in my opinion, like Flitica or like even DJB at the current moment. Sangelica is a knockoff Bryce Area and Celoius. The Mui, no guiding light, lol. More Closer Charles is a slow opener that AoE attacks, so like nice meme. Cesarado doesn't do enough. Celine can be played around. ML Araminta is too risky to 15%. And Penelope is just worse, the Hawk EE reduction. And at the bottom, finally at the end, is the symphony of speed imprints that I've ranked from best to worst. So the best two are Sid and Wanderer Silk because they can technically be a speed contester. Like they can also be at like the 300 bracket and benefit from other speed imprints. So it technically gives you one more speed imprint against cringe cleavers. Vildred is the third best because he's a DPS speed imprint that self bridges for himself if something dies. Then we have Shuri because Shuri can CR manipulate every time he attacks, hold Sashi's, watch your Shuri, guaranteed one shot on basically anything, hold Sashi's. The worst high speed imprint is Surin. Then we have Camilla because she gives attack buff and a dual attack with defense break potential. Mursa gives you some like Gamba control. Celeste is kind of like a opener because she has that type of base speed, but in my opinion she's not that impactful. And Gloom remains here just because she can hold book, but everything else about her is fucking terrible. But yeah, that's it. If you sat through my tier list, I am so sorry you did that, but yeah, thanks for watching. Like I had fun talking about it. I love talking about my opinions, but as always, I'll catch y'all next time.